After days of instability brought about by the Central Bank of Nigeria's decision to let the market freely determine the price of Nigeria's currency, the official and parallel values of the Naira converged yesterday. According to the FMDQ exchange, the value of the Naira rose by 1.8% to 756 Naira.61 to the dollar at the closing of Tuesday's trading. The executive officer of the Forward Marketing Bureau de Change Limited in Lagos, who compiles the statistics for the parallel market, Abubakar Mohammed, told Bloomberg that it was almost unchanged at 757 Naira to a dollar in the market. Thus, a day after the official value was 1.6% weaker than the parallel market, the rates nearly closed the difference between them. More so, Nigeria has seen a rush of reforms since Tinubu was sworn in last month to replace Muhammadu Buhari as president, who pursued unorthodox policies that had resulted in an almost 60% spread between the official and parallel market rates. However, the Naira weakened as much as 29% on June 14, after the central bank lifted its controls and then briefly recovered, remaining volatile since then. Joining us now on the Morning Show to analyze CBN's monetary activities is Professor Kingsley Moghalu, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Ruben. Yeah. Well, good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai.
Good to see you again.
Well, so much has happened since President Tinubu assumed office. Some people are now calling him Hurricane Tinubu. I don't need to give you the details. From the removal of the CBN governor, or rather the suspension, that is the phrase they use, of the CBN governor, to the harmonization of Forex, to removal of fuel subsidy, a lot of all these, monetary and fiscal policies. I would like you to just start by addressing those issues in seriatim, and I expect you to shoot straight. So shoot, Professor Moghalu. We're listening.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think it's important for us to understand that these are very difficult decisions, but necessary decisions that should have been taken years ago, starting with the petrol subsidy to the Forex subsidy, but they were not taken. And so it required a lot of courage to begin to tackle these issues now. And of course, that courage was also driven by the desperate situation that the Nigerian economy has found itself. So it's bound to be difficult, it's bound to be rocky for a while, but I believe that the reforms are moving in the right direction. But I want to put a caveat. It's important that we are not carried away by the joy of foreign investors or the markets. That's important for the economy. But at the end of the day, the economy is meant to serve the people of Nigeria. And the reality is that the people of Nigeria today are suffering greatly because their cost of living has risen far beyond their means. And so the government cannot move fast enough, for example, on the matter of a new minimum wage. On the matter of what to do, is there a way to subsidize transportation? Things like this should be addressed with alacrity. They should be addressed with the same determination that we have seen in terms of the reforms. So the human face of the reforms needs to be addressed and addressed quickly. But otherwise, I believe that the reforms are moving in the right direction. And there are structural bottlenecks that must be opened. And then we move, and also, apart from the question of poverty and the well-being of Nigerians more broadly, these reforms are just the first stage. They are not the end at all. In fact, it's the beginning of a series of reforms that have to take place in the Nigerian economy. They must also be accompanied, the forex reforms must be accompanied by trade reforms. Otherwise, it's just the people absorbing the shocks and the businesses getting the profits. So, we really have to move to trade policy. How do we make Nigeria's economy competitive? How can we make it productive? How can we then export value-added goods so that our exchange rates, or we attract foreign exchange? I also need to say that we have this fixation with having a strong Naira. Having a strong Naira when you're not a productive economy, all it does is that it makes you an import-dependent economy, because having a strong Naira makes your imports cheaper. Economies that are productive actually sometimes engage in competitive devaluation. China does this so that their goods are cheaper for foreigners to buy, and therefore they get more money into their country rather than wanting their currency to be very strong. So we should also be very careful about what our goal is. It is to make the market more transparent. It is to remove the arbitrage. It is to remove the corruption. And these two measures, I can say for a fact, will strike a very significant blow at corruption in Nigeria that we saw in the fuel subsidy, that we have seen in the forex subsidy. So again, that is also an advantage, the transparency, but it comes with a lot of discomfort for the masses. But if you look at where we were before these reforms, would you rather have everybody going to the black market, or would you rather have a system that is open? And I think there's a lot to be said for openness.
Okay, I get the point you've made about forex and trade reforms, trade policy reform and all that. Now, you say the policies are going in the right direction. Is the suspension of Godwin Emefiele part of that going in the right direction? Because I noticed you evaded that.
Well, discussing the suspension of Godwin Emefiele is something, to be very frank, I really have not wanted to dwell on, because, first of all, there are some judicial issues. There's a judicial procedure. He's in detention. There are allegations against him. So I don't want to comment on the exact allegations against him. But if you look at his performance as a governor of the central bank over the last several years, my view of his performance has been a matter of record. So it's not, I was saying it even when he was the governor, that I had what some might say the highest minimal regard for his performance, or indeed even his suitability for the role. And we have seen the consequence of not being careful in appointing people to such a sensitive role. When politicians make decisions and they're just trying to achieve some self-interest for a particular time, but they're not weighing very carefully the consequence, the possible consequence on the economy of a whole nation, I think that there are lessons to be learned from what we have seen over the last several years. The performance of the bank on its core mandates, has not been very impressive. And you cannot substitute political mandates for the statutory mandates of the central bank. I'm not saying it has not done anything. Of course, it's tried to do its job, but I think it got sidetracked. And so, what we are seeing today is not a surprise at all.
All right.
Especially, I want to say, going to contest for the presidency while sitting on the governorship seat of the bank, I think that just crossed the line, and in any rational view should have made him unfit to continue in that office.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Moghalu. And a few follow-up questions from what you have said. Number one is still, I know you say you don't want to really dwell on it, but it's not dwelling on the previous CBN governor, now suspended CBN governor. But you have mentioned that to such a sensitive position, there's some critical things that must be looked at. In a few
Yes.
weeks, months, the president will be recommending or nominating the CBN governor for approval by the Senate. We're great to hear your thoughts on the qualities of what to look out for. From your experience. But going back to the exchange rate, yesterday it closed at 815 Naira in the I&E window. And from an article from Nairametrics, they had looked at some phases in in seeking price discovery. One of such phases is CBN intervention. And just a few minutes ago, we're speaking to Rotus about at what point, or asking the question, at what point would the CBN intervene and what would intervention look like? Because at the moment, it looks like it's been consistently increasing. I mean, a few days back was just at 750s or 780s, and yesterday, I&E window 815. At what point and what should intervention look like?
Well, I am not close to the action. It's something the bank itself will be watching very carefully, and it will make the central bank, it will make a judgment on whether or not to intervene, and if so, when, at what point. They have made clear, because it wasn't very clear whether it was a complete free float or whether it was a managed float, such as we had when I was at the central bank. And they've made clear that this is a managed float and that no country just 100% floats its currency. Even the countries we look up to in terms of their free market credentials, occasionally they may intervene for the national interest. But that becomes secondary. It is really now willing buyer, willing seller, which was not the case before. The central bank was managing, fixing the rates. They had an official rate, and now they've collapsed all these windows into the investors and export window. And I think that this is a reform that people like me have been calling for many, many years. It's not today I began to say that the forex management of Nigeria, given where we are today as a country, is not what it should be. And that it's not today I started saying that the petrol subsidy should go, but that we should work out some things as a shock absorber. Now, to the question that you asked about the lessons that I think we all should have learned and the government should have learned and what they should be looking for going forward, I can tell you from what I know that many people in Nigeria, including political leaders, do not really understand what central banking involves, and therefore what a central bank governor should have. I would say very clear and very straight that, first of all, central banking is not commercial banking. It's not booking loans. It's not chasing deposits. Central banking is public policy, and therefore you have to appoint someone who has the intellect to understand the principles that anchor central banking. There are several. One of them is the principle of fiat money. That is to say that currency is legal tender because the government is backing it and has said it is. That is fiat money. That's a very important concept that underlies central banking. You have to have people who understand concepts like the quantity theory of money. That is to say that the amount of money in circulation will affect price levels because it will affect the value of the currency and therefore what the currency can buy. And this is what we discuss as the money supply. But that quantity theory of money, there's an opposing theory to it. And that opposing theory is what we call the fiscal theory of the price level. And that is to say that the prices of goods in the market is not simply a monetary phenomenon, but that whether the government maintains a balanced budget also affects the prices of goods. So these are competing intellectual concepts, and you cannot make effective public policy if you don't understand these things. Then you have the concept of what we call the impossible trinity. You see? So you have to understand these things. And that is what we call the policy trilemma. That, a country cannot have a fixed exchange rate, an independent monetary policy, and free flows of capital all at the same time. You have to make a choice. You may get 2 out of the 3 at any one time, but you cannot get the 3. So if you have, for example, fixed exchange rates and you have free capital mobility, then you must peg your currency to another global reserve currency. Most countries peg to the dollar. Countries like Saudi Arabia, their currency, the real, is pegged to the US dollar. Countries like United Arab Emirates, countries like Qatar, and so many others. So, and then finally, you have the concept of central bank independence. You know, why do we say that a central bank should be independent? It has a direct implication for the bank's ability to control inflation. You know, so first of all, the knowledge base has to be strong. Second is the matter of character. You have to have a central bank governor who has the character to run such a sensitive institution, who has a certain degree of integrity. You know, that's very important as well. And then, of course, you have to look at, you know, knowledge of the institution, preferably, given where we are. Would you want to find a rookie, or would you want to look for somebody who can hit the ground running? All these are things you have to look at. So there are several, and then, very important, you need a central bank governor who has a name that is recognizable today and will give, you know, some confidence to various stakeholders, such as foreign investors, the international global capitals, the citizens of Nigeria themselves, and the markets. So it's a very complex thing. It's not an easy decision to make. But when you're just looking at somebody and you're looking for who will do your bidding, or we're looking for, quote unquote, our man, you get your man. Look, if you order stockfish, you cannot look at a plate served to you and then be expecting salmon. If you want to eat okporoko, that's what you will get on your plate. That's what you ordered. You can't order okporoko and eat salmon.
Okay.
So, you know, if you want to just go that way, well, you end up where we are, where we've ended up.
But the funny thing is, you know, it's still from those very cold waters that they catch okporoko. That's where they catch salmon from.
Yes, but they're not the same thing.
But they're not the same thing. But let's go back. I like to talk economic history. It's something that I like to do in my pastime. Read up on a lot of economic history.
Yes.
What does economic history tell us about this same time? In 1986, when we started something of this nature, we saw how we predicted that, it was going to benchmark at 3 Naira to the dollar worst case scenario. And I remember reading that it topped over 11 Naira at a point and it never returned, because we have the parameters to back up this wild goose chase we have started. I mean, you talked about China, you know, the fact that if we have a lower currency, it favors exports. I remember the Plaza Hotel agreement in 85, 86, thereabouts, you know, how China was currency manipulating. But what we fail to realize that those dynamisms do not work for Nigeria.
Yes.
Because we have an economy that a lot of people think they understand, but the truth is, we don't even understand this economy.
Yeah.
And that's why we see the daunting effects.
Yes.
So I would ask you a couple of questions. Was it the right thing for President Tinubu to have announced that subsidy gone, on his inaugural speech when there was no buffers presented? Was it right for the CBN to go about this chase of convergence when the structural problems, like you stated, have not been sorted out? Was it right? Because now, the danger of the single story we tell is the progress that will come. But we don't talk about the poor people that have been left behind, that they will never access to big media like us. So let's debate it. So was it right for the president to have taken those measures in the first place without facing the structural issues? And this currency thing, was it right to have done this without fixing those structural issues?
Good questions. We are now in the zone of leadership and style. There are many ways to skin a cat. But if you look at the background on the subsidy, you will see that no leader in Nigerian recent history has been able to confront this monster, the petrol subsidy, for example. It was already going to go anyway in the petroleum PIB and so on, and there was no budgetary allocation made for it beyond end of June. But I suspect that the current president may have felt that if he did not signal immediately and decisively, several vested interests will be waiting for him at the roundabout, and he may not be able to extricate himself from their vice grip and all their tactics to just continue endless discussions about the subsidy. And so I think a leadership choice came up. We can debate that choice, but that's the purpose of leadership. It's not to do things. It's not always a popularity contest. Now, if you say to me, if it was me, what would I have done? I would have wanted to spend at least 3 months educating the public about what is to come, educating the public about why the subsidy has to go, educating the public about our recognition of the suffering it will bring. And here are the concrete plans that I have or my government has to address that suffering. But that's if it was me. Now, in taking that approach, you run the risk of being trapped at the roundabout. So therefore, that's why I say leadership choices were made. Some people may choose to go straight, boom, and then let's deal with the aftershocks and things will settle down. That is also a choice, and it comes with its consequences. And I have said that we can't move fast enough to really think about the masses of our country, because the purpose of a state is not simply to exist for the sake of existence. It's not simply even to exist for the sake of the markets and the economy, but it exists for the people and it exists for their welfare. So I should hope that there are speedy plans afoot to really address the matter of the welfare of the Nigerian people. But in terms of the style, it's a leadership choice. That's just the answer that I'll give you. And different people will make different decisions on that. Now, on the Forex, for example, another approach could have been you do a roadshow, for example, with the markets, foreign investors and all that, and say, we are going to, because we have to, remove these things. Here are the steps we're looking at. But we would want to know, Nigeria is a very attractive market. What can we expect in terms of commitments from you? Or can we expect any commitments? It's one way of also doing it. And then you go ahead and do it. But you've had a consultation with the players, the people who bring in capital. So, but like I said, it's all about choices. And institutions like the central bank or political leaders will make whatever choice they decide to make for their own reasons. I'm not inside the room where they're discussing and making these decisions. So there may be factors that you and I may not even be aware of that influence these decisions.
Okay, earlier on, you talked about monetary policy reform will not be enough. We need trade policy reform.
Absolutely. I've said it for many years.
Yeah. Now, one point that I need to bring up. On its website, the CBN says the import prohibition list remains. That's not
yes,
affected.
I noticed that.
All the 41 items. And you know that a lot of experts have been complaining, saying that, look, even the CBN pronouncing on import prohibition list will seem to be an encroachment on trade policy that is not particularly within the purview of the CBN. And now it's been reported that the Seme border has been reopened for vehicle importation into Nigeria. So is that a good thing? Do you also agree with people like Muda Yusuf and others who are saying, look, the CBN should stay with its mandate, and that going forward, the CBN should not take on trade policy? Why was that misalignment in the first place?
Well, yes. I mean, I have also been saying in the past that the CBN, the 41 items or 43 items list, is really, whether you want to say direct or indirect, trade policy decision. They've made that decision because I suppose they want to prioritize, knowing the difficulty, knowing that the market is not liquid for Forex in Nigeria. They've prioritized what the Forex that is available should go to, even though on the basis of willing buyer, willing seller. So they have made a major step. Maybe they believe it is too soon to move to the matter of the 41 items list. They may want to see how the market settles, whether they need to intervene or not. But ultimately, they need to come to the question of that 41 items because it's an interference with the free market. I would say in an ideal world, don't have those kinds of prohibitions. But if you think that goods are not important or strategic, like toothpicks, you can make toothpicks in Nigeria. So if you want to import champagne, but people should pay a massive tariff, massive duties on those kinds of imported items that are not essential. They are not what manufacturers need to manufacture their products. So you can try to make money from them by the federal government imposing very steep tariffs on them. So this is another way to look at it, and that should be now the zone of trade policy, which will set those tariffs. That would be my recommendation. But, let's give them the benefit of doubt that they know what they're doing and that they will get to these things, within a reasonable time. I mean, it's early days yet. This is a momentous decision that has been taken.
All right. Let me ask you just like to get your take on the effect of the exchange rate float. Very briefly, number one, we got reports from IATA saying they were pegging the dollar to the Naira at 770 Naira, effect on transport costs, international travel. We also look at inflationary rates going higher. What's your take? How do we manage this in the short term and perhaps in the long term?
Yes, the inflationary impact is the biggest immediate threat and the biggest risk. Especially when you combine it with the removal of petrol subsidy. So inflation in Nigeria is going to just continue to shoot up in the immediate term. That is a fact. Now, this becomes a challenge because in order to attract capital, when you have a very steep rise in inflation, most times you need to keep interest rates high for a while. But Nigeria's economy is very funny, like Rufai said. It doesn't always follow the textbooks. Why is it that despite the fact that the central bank has been raising interest rates, inflation has kept going up? There are many reasons for that. One is that what is causing this current round of inflation is not the standard definition of inflation, of too much money chasing too few goods only. There is also a cost push factor, which is that the inputs into materials have become more and more expensive, partly because of the Forex issues and partly for other reasons as well. So if you keep raising rates, and also, I forgot to mention, the central bank itself was contributing to inflation through the monetary phenomenon of illegal financing of the federal government's massive deficits to the tune of 23 trillion in ways and means lending. Of course, you're contributing to inflation with one hand, and you say you're fighting inflation with the other hand. Now, why was the ways and means lending so high? Because you have a government that could not manage its fiscal books. And there you now have the fiscal theory of the price level, being also relevant in addition to the quantity theory of money. It is a combination of these factors and how they play out in the market that causes inflation. If the federal government is far more responsible and disciplined with the budget and with spending, it will help the central bank to manage inflation. But if the federal government is just spending or borrowing like a drunken sailor, and then the central bank alone has to manage the inflationary consequences, it becomes very difficult. Where central bank independence broke down completely, as we saw, and the central bank simply became an errand boy of the presidency, essentially, we see the economic damage that has done to the country. That's why we talk about central bank independence, because it is necessary to checkmate what we call the time inconsistency problem. This is also one of the fundamental concepts of central banking. When we prioritize the now over tomorrow, and we make decisions today that may be convenient, but in the long term could actually hurt the economy.
Well, thank you.
Fighting inflation is going to be a serious challenge in the months ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, for joining us on The Morning Show.